In the headlines this evening, South Korean military leaders met with the visiting top U.S. military officer. They say there was no official discussion over the potential deployment of Washington's missile defense system to Seoul. Korea decides to join China's Asian Infrastructure Investment Bank. The focus is now on the scale of Seoul's capital contribution. Plus, the main parties gear up for the upcoming April by-elections. Stay tuned for these stories and more coming right up. It's Friday, March 27th here in Seoul. You're watching Early Edition at 6. I'm Laah Hyun-kyung.
And I'm Daniel Choy. Thank you for joining us. Let's begin with defense talks. The chairman of the U.S. Joint Chiefs of Staff, Martin Dempsey, has concluded talks with senior South Korean military officials today here in Seoul.
Well, he met with his South Korean counterpart Choi Yoon-hee and also with Defense Minister Han Min-gu. Arirang's Kim Hyun-bin has our top story.
The two sides reaffirmed the 62-year Korea-U.S. alliance, calling it a linchpin of peace and security in Northeast Asia. The Korean Joint Chiefs of Staff said that Dempsey urged the need for integrated air and missile defense. Experts believe Dempsey's comments is Washington's way of suggesting the deployment of THAAD to South Korea and incorporating the Korea air and missile defense system under development into U.S.-led missile defense system. Despite expectations, THAAD was not brought up during Friday's meeting. Now the focus shifts to U.S. Secretary of Defense Ashton Carter's visit to Seoul early next month, and whether THAAD will make that agenda. The possible THAAD deployment has stirred controversy in the region as China and Russia are strongly against the move. Their objections stem from the system's ability to shoot down any missiles in the region, as well as its state-of-the-art radar, which can monitor up to 2,000 kilometers, a range that includes large parts of the Chinese mainland. Other items that were discussed today include the transfer of wartime operational control from Washington to Seoul, as well as ways to bolster Korea-U.S. defense postures. Kim Hyun-bin, Arirang News.
Korea has finally announced its stance on a new China-led regional development bank.
It's about time. Korea will join Beijing's initiative and become a founding member.
And this will likely open up immense opportunities for businesses and local companies in infrastructure building projects in Asia while strengthening economic ties with China. Arirang's Hwang Ji-hye reports.
The South Korean government says it will join the Asian Infrastructure Investment Bank that aims to provide low-income countries with the necessary funds for large-scale development projects. And the decision is forecast to largely benefit local construction and telecommunications companies.
The bank will spur a huge demand for infrastructure work in Asia that local companies with extensive experience in construction, telecommunication, and transportation can jump into to meet the demand.
While membership of the AIIB is also expected to enhance South Korea's economic ties with China, many agree it will help Seoul by providing massive amount of funds critical to develop North Korea in case of unification.
South Korea could take a lead in developing the Northeast Asian region, including North Korea, by participating in the AIIB.
Given that this announcement only marks the beginning of this process, attention is focused on how South Korea can secure voting rights that will decide its role in the bank. As Seoul's finance ministry assured that it will do its best to maximize national interest, it added that China is unlikely to get 50% of the voting rights. That due to more than 30 countries deciding to join the bank and more expected to do so. Participants have agreed that voting rights will match with the contributions made, with Asian countries having 75% of the rights. Korea stands as the third largest economy by size after China and India among the Asian nations, but the ministry said it couldn't assure its voting rights will also be the third largest, as many other factors may play a part. Once South Korea is confirmed as a founding member and signs up around June this year, the National Assembly is expected to swiftly ratify the move. Hwang Ji-hye, Arirang News.
The decision pebble is dropped and ripple effects will be felt. How will Korea's decision to join the AIIB influence its diplomatic position teetering between China and the U.S.?
Well, watchers say it could speed up talks on Washington's potential deployment of THAAD to the Korean Peninsula. Our Hwang Sung-hee has the story.
Previously, Washington had expressed concerns about the timing of Korea joining the China-led Asian Infrastructure Investment Bank as a founding member.
So every government can make its own decision about whether the way to achieve that goal is by joining before the Articles of Agreement are clarified, or by waiting to see what the evidence looks like as the bank starts to operate.
The U.S. State Department reiterated its stance on Thursday, saying it's up to each country to join the new financial institution. Washington took issue with the transparency of the AIIB, saying it must meet the standards of other multilateral development banks. An official at Seoul's foreign ministry said Korea consulted with the U.S. leading up to the decision and delivered America's concerns to Beijing. He also said Beijing pushed hard for Seoul to join the AIIB as a founding member, bringing up the issue at every round of high-level talks between the two countries. Pundits say now could be the time to start official talks between Seoul and Washington on the possible deployment of the Terminal High Altitude Area Defense Battery, also known as THAAD, in South Korea. But for China, the AIIB and THAAD will be two separate issues.
It's true that China welcomes Korea's joining of the AIIB, but that doesn't mean it will close its eyes on the THAAD deployment. Because THAAD is deeply connected to China's national security, it will always be vocal about it.
When Korea begins its negotiations with the U.S. on the deployment of THAAD, experts say it will have to mimic its approach with the AIIB membership, listening closely to Beijing's concerns and delivering them to Washington. Hwang Sung-hee, Arirang News.
Business partner face a one-day entry ban. 77.
Digging deeper, getting to the bottom of stories that impact your life. Talking with you on air and online. Connecting you with experts on the world's most pressing issues. News and current affairs at its best. With Laah Hyun-kyung and Daniel Choy.
Arirang News.
Arirang News.
Arirang News.
On Early Edition at 6.
Investigators of the Germanwings plane crash say the autopilot function was reprogrammed to crash the plane on purpose. Citing audio data from the retrieved black box, French prosecutors say the co-pilot deliberately blocked the pilot out of the cockpit. Our Kwon Soo-ah reports.
The mystery of the Germanwings plane crash may soon be solved, but the more we learn, the harder it becomes to comprehend. Investigators are now saying the co-pilot intentionally put the plane carrying 150 people on a crash course into the French Alps. Data by an aviation tracking website shows that someone reprogrammed the plane's autopilot from 38,000 feet to below 100 feet. That someone appears to be 27-year-old Andreas Lubitz, who apparently was alone in the cockpit before the crash.
The most plausible, realistic interpretation, as far as we are concerned, is that the co-pilot, through voluntary abstention, refused to open the door of the cabin for the captain.
Today, news reached us that this tragedy had gained a new, utterly incomprehensible dimension.
A possible motive surrounds the co-pilot's psychological state, as he was said to have interrupted his flying training for some months. But afterwards, he passed all the tests, including medical checks. Psychotherapists say his act must have been planned down to the smallest detail. In fact, investigations point to the fact that Lubitz was breathing steadily before the crash. So far, officials say there was no indication it was a terror act. People who knew Lubitz say he was an ordinary person whose longtime dream was to become a pilot.
I cannot imagine that he has done it with intention. This does not fit in this picture I have from him.
Many airlines have responded quickly to the tragedy, introducing strict two-person cockpit rules.
Currently, there is not the requirement to have 2 members in the cabin. After this order, there will be a requirement to have 2 members in the cabin.
Back in the Alps, where recovery efforts are continuing in harsh conditions, special flights and buses are taking the families of the victims as close as possible to their loved ones. Kwon So-ah, Arirang News.
Shifting our focus to other parts of our world, an arsonist's attempt to set fire to the Korean Cultural Center in Tokyo may elevate existing tensions between Korea and Japan. Seoul has requested a swift investigation into the incident. Our Kim Min-ji reports.
CCTV footage showed a masked person pouring lighter fluid on the outer wall of the Korean Cultural Center and setting it on fire around midnight on Wednesday. The unidentified person soon fled the scene. There were no casualties or significant damage to the property, except for soot marks on the wall near the center's entrance. The Korean government has expressed dismay over the attempted arson. Officials have called on Japan's foreign ministry to heighten security in the area and asked for a prompt investigation. This is not the first arson attempt on Korean property in Japan. Back in 2013, a man threw signal flares at the Korean Consulate General in Kobe. The motive for the latest arson is still unknown, but Japanese police believe similar negative feelings may have influenced the suspect. And the attempt could add fuel to already heightened tensions between Seoul and Tokyo. This year marks the 50th anniversary of the normalization of diplomatic ties between the two countries, but bilateral relations have been thorny, particularly in regards to Japan's interpretation of World War II history. Despite repeated calls for an acknowledgement of the country's wartime atrocities, many feel the Abe administration has yet to show sincere remorse. Kim Min-ji, Arirang News.
It is now official. Japanese Prime Minister Shinzo Abe will address both houses of the U.S. Congress when he visits Washington next month. The focal point for Korea, whether Abe will admit and sincerely express remorse for his country's past wartime atrocities. Our Connie Kim has more.
John Boehner, Speaker of the U.S. House of Representatives, says Abe's address on April 29th will be an opportunity to hear ways to expand economic and security cooperation from a close ally. During his 8-day trip to the U.S. next month, Abe is expected to promote his efforts to revise Japan's pacifist constitution and give his country the right to collective self-defense. In other words, allow Japan to come to the military aid of allies if they come under attack. U.S. officials are hoping to see a breakthrough in trade talks with Japan, in particular in relation to the massive Trans-Pacific Partnership Pact. In Korea, eyes are focused on whether Abe will show remorse for Japan's wartime atrocities during his speech to Congress. The offer to Abe came despite strong efforts by Korean American organizations to stop him. There are concerns Abe would use the podium to promote Japan as a peace-loving nation since the end of World War II, without mentioning the atrocities it committed during the war. The Abe administration continues to deny state responsibility for the country's past wrongdoings. Korea was a victim of Japan's wartime aggression. It's estimated that some 200,000 women, most of whom are from Korea, were mobilized for work in military brothels during the war. Connie Kim, Arirang News.
And in domestic politics, Korea's main parties are gearing up for the upcoming by-elections, which is about a month away. Now, only 4 seats are up for grabs, but both parties are giving their all as this will be a good chance to gauge voter sentiment ahead of next year's general elections. Our Park Ji-won reports.
The ruling Saenuri Party held a training program for hundreds of regional party members this afternoon in Seongnam. Key members of the party, including leader Kim Moo-sang, attended the program to strengthen the Conservative Party's grip on the region.
This district in Seongnam requires a lot of effort from a representative lawmaker, such as a subway project linking Seongnam to other cities. Do you think that a first-term lawmaker from the opposition can win a bid for such a big project?
The main opposition New Politics Alliance for Democracy is also trying to make an impact in the area, holding its Supreme Council meeting there earlier Friday. Afterwards, party leader Moon Jae-in visited a community welfare center and the region's textile industry association.
The city of Seongnam recently passed a municipal ordinance allowing its citizens to receive public allowances for postnatal care for the first time in the country. This is what city council members and the mayor from our party have achieved.
4 constituencies are up for grabs in next month's by-elections, one each in Seongnam, Seoul, Incheon, and the southwestern city of Gwangju. 3 of the seats were vacated by the dissolved far-left Unified Progressive Party late last year. The remaining seat was left open by a Saenuri Party lawmaker who lost his status due to a jail sentence. These by-elections will be significant for both parties.
The result will decide whether the ruling party will have a successful third year or whether the opposition party will strengthen its presence. In addition, the election could also decide whether the 2 party leaders will gain public recognition as future presidential candidates.
The by-elections will be held on April 29th. Park Ji-won, Arirang News.
President Park Geun-hye says Korea's agricultural and fisheries sector needs to adopt corporate technology, capital, and know-how to become a growth industry and expand overseas. Meeting with the country's farmers, fishermen, and industry heads today, she said Korea's economy is at a turning point, and agricultural and fisheries will play a critical role in its future. President Park committed to creating a startup-friendly environment and to develop innovative technologies so that the sector can grow beyond food production and make use of Korea's free trade deals to increase its global competitiveness. We have some useful information for Samsung smartphone fans in the U.S. Pre-orders for the Galaxy S6 will start on Friday, local time there. The Galaxy S6 will be available for about $200 for a 2-year contract with AT&T, with the Edge priced a bit higher at $300. The unlocked units will cost you somewhere between around $700 to $800. The global release date for the Galaxy S6 series is set for April 10th. Samsung hopes to catch up with Apple's 41% U.S. market share. The Korean tech giant is currently sitting at a 29% share in the world's second largest smartphone market.
An increasing number of Korean businesses are looking to Latin America for expansion and growth. Now, companies from both regions are attending this year's Inter-American Development Bank meeting, which kicked off in the southern port city of Busan. Our Shin Se-min reports.
This local steel product manufacturing company says its business has been hurting. Supplying the shipbuilding and heavy machinery industries has become a lot more complicated.
Cheaper Chinese ships fueling the global market have made supplying the naval industry more competitive, but opportunities like this could help my company expand in the Latin American region.
Un is one of the 3,000-plus participants from a total of 48 member nations gathered at the annual Inter-American Development Bank meeting in Busan. Through one-on-one summits, entrepreneurs are making valuable connections and exchanging business practices.
So it's a very vibrant relationship, and also it's quite a high value-added relationship in terms of Korea. The Korean companies are investing and are producing some of the most sophisticated products in the world.
Trade volume with Latin American countries more than doubled last year to $54.2 billion, up from a mere $2.2 when Korea first joined the AIIB. Direct investment to the region also rose 6-fold to $35 billion.
The Latin American market is one that many Korean companies have yet to tackle. Countries there are rich in resources with an annual 6% growth rate. It's the next target market for many Korean businesses, both large and mid-sized.
Although the deals being signed here aren't huge figures yet, the local trade agency believes that it is a progressive first step for many SMEs expanding out to the global market, especially creating trust-building opportunities between the nations. Shin Se-min, Arirang News, Busan.
Korea produces over 700,000 tons of slag a year. Now, slag as in the waste from processed iron and steel. Until now, the heaps of slag have been buried underground with no way to reuse it, but that won't be the case in the near future. Our Sun Jung-in has the story.
Slag from iron and steel has long been perceived as a nuisance that contributes to air pollution and water contamination. Korea currently buries 720,000 tons of it every year in landfills without any way to recycle it. Now, the Korea Environmental Industry and Technology Institute, along with the R&D Center for Valuable Recycling, have succeeded in developing a technology for turning the waste product into cement.
We freeze the reduced slag using a rapid cooling system. After it is pulverized, we mix it with additional agents to produce cement.
The cement requires less time to solidify. Unlike regular cement that takes almost 20 days to dry, slag cement needs less than 7 days. That means it could be put to use in civil engineering projects such as emergency road work or tunnel repair. Experts have high hopes for the new technology, as rapid hardening cement is an industry worth $25 million and it is expanding every year. Currently, Korea imports 80% of its rapid hardening cement.
If we can get the pricing right and further develop the market, it will create significant added value for the economy and be exportable.
Industry experts expect the new technology to lead to an annual savings of $4 million in slag disposal costs and a reduction in carbon emissions of 500,000 tons a year, in addition to creating 1,200 new jobs. Son Jang-in, Arirang News.
Young adults use social media less than people in their 30s last year. Statistics released by the Korea Information Society Development Institute show that people in their 30s were about 7% more active in social media than teenagers. People in their 20s were most active, with a nearly 75% usage rate. The institute said that although the total number of people using social media increased overall, total time using it went down, as people in their 20s reduced their daily usage time by 22 minutes. Most Koreans use Kakao Story, followed by Facebook.
Now in sports news, Korea's Olympic medalist Park Tae-hwan held a press conference a couple of hours ago. He apologized about his doping scandal.
Right, choking back tears, Park said he never relied on drugs, but he is extremely sorry for letting his fans down. He was stripped of 6 medals won at the Asian Games last year after failing a doping test taken before the event, along with his record as the most decorated Korean athlete to compete at the Asian Games.
Well, he may lose more than that, as the punishment could affect his chances of participating in the 2016 Rio Olympics. The 18-month suspension was, of course, handed down by swimming's governing body, FINA.
And the ban ends in March next year, but Park is not eligible to represent the national team under the Korean Olympic Committee's current regulation. It bans athletes from competing for 3 years after receiving a penalty.
Good evening, I'm Michelle Park here with the latest weather forecast. It's been a mostly clear, sunny day here in Korea. However, about 5 millimeters of rain are expected to fall on Jeju Island tonight. Now, temperatures have been hovering over the seasonal average these days, and it looks like that trend will continue throughout our weekend as well. Now, expect a little bit of rain, though, to fall on Saturday night through Sunday morning, but sadly not enough to relieve us from this dry weather. Now, tomorrow is the 9th anniversary of World Wildlife Fund's annual Earth Hour. People and businesses are encouraged to turn off their lights for an hour from 8:30 to 9:30 p.m. to raise awareness about climate change. And this year, Seoul's landmark facilities are expected to participate, so maybe you can gather with your family or friends and enjoy an hour of darkness. Now let's have a look at the readings for tomorrow. So we'll start off the Saturday morning at 4 and gets up high to 16 degrees. Meanwhile, the other regions are looking at 21 and 16 for Daegu and Busan. Now moving over to other regions, Jeju Island gets up to 16, Dokdo hits to 17, while Mount Gyeongang dips to 6 degrees. Well, that's all for now. I'm Michelle Park, and I hope you have a wonderful evening. And here's a look at the weather conditions around the world.
Well, that's the end of this edition of our newscast. Have a good start to your day or a safe drive home. This has been Daniel Choy.
And I'm Laah Hyun-kyung. Have a great weekend, everyone. See you again next week. Goodbye for now.